So my project is characterization of an enigmatic sedimentary dike in southern Ontario, Canada. So when you first meet someone, you generally ask them 3 basic questions. Who are you, where are you from, and how old are you? For my summer research, I've been asking these same questions, except instead of asking a person, I've been asking a sedimentary dike in southern Ontario, seen right here. We're asking these questions we're asking these questions to better classify the rock itself and then to better understand the surface conditions and paleo environment that existed when the dike was in place. We hope that through this, we can better understand the geologic history of the broader southern Ontario area. So first, a little bit of background. This is a field photo of the sedimentary dike in context. So it's sandwiched between an ultramafic dike on this side and then the basement rock on this side. This dike is located within the Grenville province of the Grenville orogeny, so highlighted here. And then if we zoom in a little bit, here's the dike's location, located within the bedrock of that broader area, and it's a Mesoproterozoic bedrock. If we zoom in just a tad further, we found this dike in a road cut, so it is seen right here, sandwiched again between that mafic dike and the basement rock. And then just down a little bit farther, there's another mafic dike with 2 brecciated dikes on either side. We don't know if the sedimentary dikes are related, but that context could be important for future research. So moving into our first big question, what is this rock? What kind of rock is it? To figure this out, we classified the hand sample through visual inspection, and then we also cut a billet and made a thin section for analysis. So our first observations came from the hand sample right here. There are some distinct zonation patterns with different colors and different textures. So we have this darker red band and then a lighter gray one and then back to darker red. What these bands in different colors indicate is a differing chemical composition. So that tells us that we could have different elements and different minerals in each of these different sections. If we move into the billet itself in the thin section, so this is our thin section visualized in plane polarized light, and this is our thin section visualized in cross polarized light. And what you can see is different mineral grains and also different texture and mineral concentration bands. So these bright white clasts are calcite, and you can also see them over here in this kind of like orangey holographic color. You also have some biotite, which are these circles seen here and here. They're kind of hard to see, but they're like a tan brown in PPL and more of a dark brown in XPL. Then we also have different banding. So in plane polarized light, we have this coarser grained belt right through here outlined in red, and also these sections, where the rest of the thin section is more of a finer grain. And then we have different concentrations of minerals. So then we have these darker minerals highlighted in this blue and also this light blue. And then in XPL, you can also see a higher calcite concentration in this dark blue area. So what these different characteristics tell us is this rock is a carbonate with angular accessory minerals like biotite, so our biotite class, a fine grain matrix, just generally fine grain, and then that distinct zonation pattern. So now that we've answered the question of like what the rock is, we now ask ourselves, how did this dike get here? Some of the features in the thin section could help give us a little bit more of an idea for that. So if we look at that thin section in PPL again, you have this alignment of minerals in different in this flow pattern. So what that flow pattern tells us that instead of a sedimentary infill event where like a crevice just existed and sediment poured into it where this dike is, that sediment was actually injected into the basement rock because we would have needed some type of pressure to create this alignment pattern. You can also see that alignment pattern in the billet that we cut. Also, if you look at the fine grain matrix, so like these finer grain sections throughout the entire thin section, you don't see any type of primary crystallization. So what that tells us is that instead of this being a carbonate that was fully dissolved and then reprecipitated like other carbonate rocks, we think it was actually remobilized. So the carbonate sediment existed in a different area and was somehow transported to this area and then re-injected into the basement rock. So broadly, our research suggests it's a remobilized carbonate that was injected into the basement rock. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with the 2 questions that remain is where is this rock from and how old is it? The short answer is that we aren't entirely sure, but we do have some speculations. So if we recall this map from the background section, All of these green rocks right here are contain carbonate sediments, and they once covered this entire map area and then have since been eroded in some of these other areas. This is some of the only carbonate sediment that's found in this region, and they are late Cambrian and Ordovician in age. So if the sediment proves to be from this source, that means it would be the dike's emplacement had to be younger than the late Cambrian. As a whole, to our knowledge, this is the first sedimentary carbonate injectite that's been identified and studied in this area. It doesn't resemble any other dike systems, so further research is needed to understand the surface conditions and paleo environment and then answer the questions that we set out to answer. However, a carbonate injectite does imply surface conditions and an injection event that hasn't been previously identified, so we need to keep looking at this. Thank you.
Great job. Okay, the floor is now open for questions. I have a question.
Yeah.
How big of a deal is it that we don't know how old this rock is? Because it seems pretty simple. Like you go out in the field, you have an idea of what you're going to do. You're like, we're going to age it. We're going to use these methods.
Right. Yeah. So our original implications for this rock were to actually date it using uranium lead dating, which is part of our future work. But you have to have zircons to do that, which is just like a really specific crystal. When we looked at this rock and ground it up and tried to find them, they weren't there, which was really surprising. And we kind of had to take a hard left with this project and just characterize it broadly because we thought it was one type of rock and we thought the zircon were going to be there. And then they weren't, which was really confusing. So to date this, it's actually part of Bar Peak, my mentor's like broader PhD thesis, is to basically by dating all of these, we can help better understand what happened in this region. And then her work is specifically on understanding the Great Unconformity. So like with all of the different sample locations, this being one of them, the point was to try to understand what was happening to try to understand that larger event. So the fact that we couldn't date it says something funky that we just need to keep looking at, basically.
Yeah, thank you. Angie asked a question that you kind of answered, but I'm going to read it anyway, just in case. Could you tell us a bit more about how and why you chose this site in particular?
So this was just a sedimentary dike that was found in a road cut. Bara actually has sites all over this region, I think 15 or 16 of them, and it was just a great exposure. I honestly cannot speak to why we chose this site specifically because I didn't sample these rocks and I'm not the one that chose the specific location. But I think the interesting context between the mafic and then the basement rock and this dike right in the middle gave us something interesting to work with. And then it also existed in the broader area of her just general research.